Welcome into the Irish NFL show, draft week, and we're delighted to welcome back a former guest of the show, Matt Verderame, now of Sports Illustrated. Matt has been on with us previously, so it's great to have him back on in the week leading up to the big event, one of the biggest calendar dates in the NFL year, the NFL draft from Kansas City this Thursday. Matt, you're very welcome back into the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
Man, I think you've been very vocal over the course of the last week that your intention is to travel out to the draft this week. Are you looking forward to the madness that comes with draft week?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I'm different than most. I'm lucky enough. I'm only like 6.5 hours away driving. So I'm just going to drive out there. I'd rather drive than fly. I don't fear flying. I hate sitting in airports. So give me the open road. I'm fine with that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. To be out there for a few days and work the draft for SI and provide some grades and some reaction and all those types of things. But yeah, I'm looking forward to eating enough barbecue to put me in a food coma. So that's more than the draft, I think, is even the thing I'm most excited about for my trip to Kansas City.
And we were discussing before we started recording that I would be with you on that, Matt. Now, one of the pieces that you wrote for SI was you looked, I suppose, at the teams in the draft over the past 5 years and kind of who was really good at drafting and who wasn't so good. And there were my Broncos right towards the bottom of the table. But I suppose the surprise at number 2 was the Colts. And obviously, the wheels came off last year with everything. And as you point out in the piece, really it's been the quarterback position that has left them down. Though last year their O-line play wasn't great either. How confident are you that Shane Steichen can get things back on track? And what way, it's difficult to know, because we don't know what the Texans are going to do, who might come up to 3, what way it will go. But would you have, I suppose, in terms of who Steichen might work better with, Richardson, Levis, or if Stroud falls? I suppose just interested in your thinking on the Colts.
The Colts are fascinating, and it's a really good point. I mean, you're right. In that piece that I wrote, I basically had a point system that I kind of came up with along with my editors about, ranking these teams and how successful they've been over the last 5 years. And having the Colts second was a shock to me too, because I've won a playoff game. But by our rankings, it rewards teams that have not, because you didn't get any points if the player that you drafted is still not on the team. Like, the guy's still got to be there. And they've drafted Quentin Nelson. They've drafted Shaq Leonard. They've drafted Michael Pittman Jr., Jonathan Taylor, Braden Smith. They've drafted good players. The problem has been, as you point out, and you're right, I wrote in the piece, they've had different quarterbacks every single year since Andrew Luck surprisingly retired in the summer in 2019. So, look, I think for Chris Ballard, he's done a pretty good job of finding players, who they've been able to draft and develop. They've got to find that big piece, and I think they have to do it this year. They draft 4th. Well, Young is going to go first, so he's not going to be there. The question for the Colts is a couple of things. One is, does Houston take a quarterback? If Houston takes a quarterback, that obviously eliminates one of your options. If not, that's great news for the Colts. Then at third with the Cardinals, do the Cardinals trade out of that pick? Everything that you understand about the draft and where the Cardinals are right now in their development says they should trade back. But will they? Can they find that guy? I personally think for the Colts, with Shane Steichen, he did a really nice job developing Jalen Hurts. Anthony Richardson seems like a great fit in a stylistic sense because he can run a little bit like Hurts. He gives you that athletic profile. That being said, everything you hear out of the Colts is that Will Levis is the guy that they really like, and you just wonder if he's going to get there, which frankly I think is kind of nuts. If you look at his tape, the fact we're asking if Will Levis is going to get to 4 is kind of blowing my mind. But I think that's the question that we have to ask at this point. But they have to be right, no matter who they take. And let's be real, none of us know who's going to succeed and fail. That's the great mystery of the draft. They have to be right. I think if Stroud gets to 4, though, which is a real possibility talking to people around the league, I think he should be the pick. I think the Colts should take him and run and not even think twice. But will they? That remains a question that we're not going to know till Thursday night.
Matt, you did a very good piece on the Raiders recently where you kind of discussed these overindulgence by GM Zietler and the head coach Josh McDaniels to kind of rely on former Patriots players, I suppose, the kind of familiarity they have with those players. Doesn't necessarily always work. But if you actually take a step back and look at their drafts over the past 4 or 5 years, no matter who was involved, whether it was Mike Mayock and other people, like they haven't hit a lot in terms of the players in which they've drafted. Is there, bearing in mind how the Raiders season went last year, is there real pressure on the GM to get this one right?
Yeah, there is. You're right. When you look back at the first round picks, and it's not just been Ziegler, it really was mostly Mayock and Gruden, truthfully. But when you look at these first round picks, Damon Arnett out of the league, Henry Ruggs, tragic situation, but in prison. Alex Leatherwood lasted 1 year, got cut after 1 year with the Raiders. Cleveland Farrell, gone. Jonathan Abram, gone. Josh Jacobs now playing very well, but they didn't even pick up his 5th-year option. When you have all those first round picks, and the best thing that you have is a running back on a franchise tag, that's a problem. They do have a lot of pressure on them because when you look at that division, the Chargers are a playoff team. The Chiefs are perennially hosting the AFC title game. Like if you don't do everything right in the AFC West, you're not going to catch Kansas City. You're not going to compete with the Chargers. Now, you look over at the Broncos. The Broncos went out. They got Sean Payton this offseason. They bolstered the offensive line. After this year, they're back to their full complement of picks. They're at least, you would think, moving in a direction where they'll improve. I don't know that you can say that about the Raiders right now. The Raiders didn't improve in my eyes this offseason. Is Garoppolo better than Derek Carr? I don't think he is. At best, maybe it's a wash. I think Carr's better, frankly, and Carr's certainly more durable. But Ziegler's got to figure this out, and McDaniels has to figure this out. And to your point in the piece that I wrote, we see this all the time, not just with the Raiders, but when guys leave the New England nest, this happens constantly. Like when Matt Patricia went to Detroit from New England, they signed something like 15 players who are former Patriots. I mean, that's almost a third of the roster that they just went out and just said, well, that guy played in New England. And we saw that trend continue with the Raiders this offseason. Jimmy Garoppolo, former Patriot. Philip Dorsett, a former Patriot. They went out and brought in Jacoby Myers from the Patriots. You cannot duplicate the Patriot way unless you have prime Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. If you don't have that, the rest of it means nothing. And so that's my concern now with the Raiders is you just see them following the same pattern that all these other teams followed. It doesn't work.
Matt, as a Broncos fan, I'm going to have to ask, because you talked about going in the right direction. But how confident are you that, I suppose, or in going in the right direction, is that getting Sean Payton? Is that this year? Do you think he can get Russell Wilson back on track? Because we heard the stories last year around Russ and the office in the building, but also the fracture, right? You saw Mike Purcell, and despite what, Broncos media might tell you, he wasn't wishing Russ all the best. We know that at some stage, at least, some of the players deliberately started playing future in the locker room to needle Russ. So that fracture was there. In terms of Sean Payton resetting it, can he get Russ back on track? Or were his comments where he talked about it doesn't need to be the QB, the most important thing is the relationship with the owners and the GM? Was that him giving himself some leeway there?
I think that the Broncos are in better hands because Nathaniel Hackett, and I'm not trying to pile on the man, I mean, other than Urban Meyer, might be the worst head coach I've ever seen. So you can't be worse. And Sean Payton has a ring on his finger for a reason, and very well could have had another one, if not for one of the worst calls in NFL history in that NFC title game between the Saints and the Rams. Payton's an excellent coach, and he's a very good offensive mind, and they will be better because of him. The question you have with Denver, to your point, is can Russell Wilson be a little better, a lot better, like what he was 3-4 years ago? I kind of fall into the camp of I think he'll be better. I don't think he'll be a top 10 quarterback again, but can they get him to where he's, I don't know, middle of the road, 14th, 15th? Can they get him to be Derek Carr, to go back to the same name we just used? Can they get him to be him? Because if they can, with their receivers and a better offensive line and a good defense, that's at least a team that might be able to compete for a wild card spot. Now, I don't think they're going to win the division. I don't think they're going to challenge the Chiefs and the Bengals and the Bills and the AFC. But if you're the Broncos and you go 9-8, you fight for a playoff spot, maybe you fight with the Chargers for second in the division, That's a huge step up from where they were last year, which was a joke. I mean, where they're giving up 50 points on Christmas, in front of the country, in front of the world. So I do think Denver will be better, because I will say this. If you've ever spent 5 minutes around Sean Payton is not going to tolerate some of the stuff that happened there last year. Like, Russell Wilson will not have an office. That will not happen. He's already talked about the fact he will not have his own coaching staff in the building. Like, this is going to be, he's not going to deal with Russell Wilson doing high knees up and down the plane. That's just not going to happen with Sean Payton. Okay, and if it does, there's going to be a fist fight. Like, that's not going to last for more than about 5 seconds. So I think he'll fix some of the stuff. The question is just, how washed up is Russell Wilson, and how much of this has been maybe he was left to his own devices a little bit too much.
Matt, I'd forgotten about that airplane gif on the way over to London. Oh, no, yeah, I shouldn't have forgotten about it. Look, I'm a Giants fan. You touched on the fact that you're from New York, and one storyline which is kind of simmering away in the background, maybe more so because it's draft week, is the Saquon Barkley saga. And Joe Shane did his presser last week, and it was supposed to be a pre-draft presser, but essentially it turned into the Saquon Barkley presser, where he was at, I think of the 18 questions he was asked, 15 were relating to Saquon. He seems very disappointed with the agent. That's in terms of who he's dealing with. And now the storyline is that he wants 17 million more than McCaffrey, and the Giants offered him 13, and he's been misadvised, and he should have taken the 13 million because there's no market essentially for running backs there. Is this one to keep an eye on? Like, there's been also suggestions of a trade, which is probably a little bit out there, but like, he has to prove himself essentially again for another year, once he plays on the tag. And will he play on the tag, or are we looking at a mad situation where he won't accept it and look for that contract?
I mean, if I'm the Giants, I'd say, go ahead, don't play on the tag. You're going to give up a lot of money. And I think because of that, he's going to play on the tag. Like, that's just reality. I mean, most of these guys, look, how many guys actually sit out? I know Le'Veon Bell famously did it. How many guys do it? For every Le'Veon Bell, I could give you 50 guys who sit there and say, I'm not going to play, I'm not going to play, I'm not going to play. And then their agent calls them and says, oh, by the way, you're going to give up $1 million a week. Now, I'll play. Like that. I mean, that's the way of the world, right? I mean, even, I every once in a while I'll laugh and I'll hear somebody, one of our chairs will say something like, well, these guys, they have enough money, they can sit out. Nobody has enough money that they're giving up $1 million a week. Nobody. I don't care who you are. Okay. Especially when, in the NFL world, yeah, all right, you're getting paid, but half that money is going Uncle Sam for taxes. You've also got to pay off your agent, maybe your marketer, and you've got, and a lot of people too, let's face it. I mean, I don't know if this is the case with Saquon Barkley, but you send the money home for certain people, right? I mean, maybe your parents, maybe siblings, maybe friends, whatever the case is. But there's drains on that bank account, right? It's not just nobody or very few guys in the NFL are just making that money, stashing it, and doing nothing with it and driving around in a Pinto. Like, that's just not the world we live in. So I think with Barkley, the odds are, I mean, he's going to play. Now, if I'm the Giants, I just gave $40 million a year to Daniel Jones, which complicates this in a way, because if you're Saquon Barkley, you're sitting there saying, hey, I'm a way better running back than Daniel Jones as a quarterback, and you just paid that guy $40 million a year. You don't have any money left over for me. So I understand. And I would agree with Saquon Barkley. He deserves to get paid. He is an excellent running back. The problem is he's a running back, and he's been beat up at times in his career. And if I'm the Giants, I'd probably play it out this year, and then I'd probably let him walk in free agency, get a comp pick, and move on. I know that's cold, but if you're looking at it from a business standpoint, that's probably the right business move. Very few running backs get a huge second contract, and at the end of that second contract, the team goes, you know what? That was a great value for us. That was good. That normally is not the case at that position.
Matt, one of the, I suppose, you highlighted team needs, and for the Vikings, 2 of the 3 that you highlighted were on the defensive side. Now, a lot of that stuff was talked about Minnesota nice, but it's fair to say fans weren't too nice towards Ed Tell last year, and understandably so, because it felt like, they overachieved, possibly as a result of, Kevin O'Connell coming in and a different culture. And under Zimmer, it felt like, it had really almost become toxic. So maybe that was it. They have Justin Jefferson, but they are in, what's famously called purple purgatory with the Vikings, with Kirk Cousins. In terms of what they look to maybe do in the draft this week, given I suppose there's some real premier cornerbacks there, but it is a deep cornerback class. What way would you think in terms of team building? Do they go that, or did they look to bring a QB in to replace Cousins after next year?
So I'm going to answer that in a second, but I got some breaking news for you guys.
Aaron
Rodgers finally
traded. I was going to say.
Traded. So it took forever. I can't express how happy I am. It's finally over. And after all this, they swap first-round picks where the Packers move up 2 spots from 15 to 13. The Packers are getting a second-round pick, number 42. The Jets have 2 of them, by the way, this year. They're getting a 6th-round pick, number 207, and a conditional 2024 second-round pick that does become a first if Rodgers plays 65% of the plays. Okay? And the Jets also getting a 5th-round pick this year. So there you have it. Aaron Rodgers goes to the Jets, and our long national, or I guess I should say on this show, our global nightmare is over. It finally happened, and nobody has to talk about this for the rest of time. All right, on to the Vikings. Worst transition ever. All right. Look, I think if you're Minnesota, you've got Cousins for 1 more year, right? And if you can find a quarterback in the first round you really like, go ahead and take him. I mean, if it's Hooker, if Richardson falls, if Levis falls, you really like one of those guys, then I think that getting the right quarterback supersedes any other need you have. That being said, and you're right, Ed Donatell was not treated very nicely, but also for good reason. They were horrific defensively. And so I think if you're them, you've got to find some answers on the defensive side.